Hi, and welcome back to my channel, where I'm going to cover the Bard's College of Spirits class specialization from Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, providing a brief description of the subclass as well as explain and set up the various features gained. The College of Spirits trains bards to draw forth the occult powers to work with various spirits that exist in the material planes, though this subclass has developed primarily from the world of Ravenloft. Due to the nature of the rules of Ravenloft, talking a DM into allowing this class outside of that particular world will take quite a bit of effort, as most DMs generally see Ravenloft as a one-way door. Characters can get into it, but can never leave it. This generally means that the knowledge of this particular subclass would be severely restricted to within the Ravenloft genre, or world. However, I can see a way that this knowledge could be gleaned through divination methods, so it is entirely possible that it has leached out into other worlds. As a result of this, and due to the nature of the spirits involved, these bards, while they might be able to summon them, may not necessarily be able to maintain control over the spirits that they're summoning, simply because of how much more powerful spirits are within the Ravenloft genre. Bards are able to choose their college at level 3, and as a result, a player can experiment with their character a little bit before getting to level 3 and figuring out what their class specialization is that they want to take. Gives them a little bit of time to figure out how they're playing their character, which may dictate to them what kind of class specialization they want. So I'm going to go ahead and level up our bard here to level 3 so that we can actually select the College of Spirits here. And the first feature your character will receive is called Guiding Whispers, and it's granting your character access to the Guidance cantrip with an extended range. Normally, the Guidance cantrip requires you to touch the character you're granting the bonus die to, but in this case, your character can simply apply it to anyone who is within 60 feet of where your character is standing and is visible to your character. This cantrip also does not take up any of the bardic cantrips that your character knows, so it is essentially a free cantrip. Now, normally, I would recommend setting up a specialized group to handle spells that are not necessarily coming from the same school or source material, if you will, that was associated with the class that you're dropping it into. But in this case, we don't need to worry about that because the stat, or in this case, the casting ability of a bard, which is charisma, I believe. Yes, charisma, doesn't apply in relation to this particular cantrip. So you should just be able to drop it into place and have it apply to your cantrip, although in this case it dropped into level 1 for some reason. I remember why. That's because this is an abilities group, not a spell group. So the minute I convert that, it's going to break it out to its normal group. I remember that when I created this quote-unquote base character, the character wizard still had a few issues, so that was one of the things that remained as one of the issues. Also at Bard level 3, your character is going to gain the Spiritual Focus feature, which expands on what your character can use for spell focus when casting their bardic spells. In this case, the new types of objects are a candle, crystal ball, skull, spirit board, or Taroka deck. These items, when used to cast spells after your character has gained Bard level 6, will allow your character to add an additional d6 die to either healing or damage rolls when casting spells to do healing or damage. For example, if your character is casting Cure Wounds and they are rolling a single 1d8 for the normal healing die, at level 6 you'll be able to add an additional d6 to that roll and add the value rolled to the total amount healed, and that will apply for level 6 or higher. But we're going to go through and set that up now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop Spiritual Focus into our particular action sheet here. I'm going to call this College of Spirits for the group. Oh, good, I got it right this time. And then I'm going to add 2 effects to this. Specifically, I'm going to add a damage effect as well as a healing effect. And that's because I want to separate out these kinds of damages and healing capabilities here. I'm just going to drop a d6 into each of them. And as this doesn't change, it does not increase with your Bardic Inspiration dice, it will remain this way. But remember, you can only use the damage or the healing bonus damage rolls here after level 6. Level 6 or higher, I should say. So even though we've set it up now, you can't use these two until you get to level 6. So I'm going to put an LVL 6 here to indicate that particular requirement. So how this is going to work at this level is as follows. Generally, you would use your spell focus, and let's say we want to cast Cure Wounds. Do I happen to have that here? Yes, I do. Okay, good. So I'm going to switch over to combat and actions, and I'm going to drop Cure Wounds, say, onto Ape 1 here. It's not damaged, but I'm using this as an example. Because this character is level 3, that is all I get to do. I do not get to do anything else in relation to the extra dice. But, and this is only going to apply once your character hits level 6. Let's say I go back and I want to do this die roll again. I'm going to drop that onto the ape, but then immediately afterwards, I'd be able to do this, provided I'm using one of my spell foci from this particular feature as that capability. And that's really the key, is that you have to use a spell foci that is associated with this feature. If you're using a normal orb, for example, for a spell foci, this will not apply. Now, the same thing can deal with something in relation to damage. Let's say that I'm going to roll damage and apply that to this vampire. At level 3, I would just simply do this. But once my character hits level 6, I'll be able to drop the damage die into place, as well as drop this damage die into place, as long as, again, I'm using a foci that comes from this particular feature. The final feature your character is going to gain at Bard level 3 is called Tales from Beyond, which allows you to commune with a spirit and tell its tale through your character, based on a die roll from your Bardic Inspiration die pool, and through the use of a bonus action. This will require your character to be actively holding their spiritual focus versus a normal spell focus, as they normally otherwise would, and that's going to pretty much apply to all of the features in relation to this subclass. Now, some of that may have sounded a little bit confusing. Specifically, the spirit table that I'm referring to is right here at the bottom of the information sheet. And this table is a listing of all of the stories that your character can tell on behalf of a particular spirit. But what you're going to do is you're going to roll on this particular table a die that is equal to the level of your Bardic Inspiration dice. For example, at this particular level, the highest value you'll be able to roll is a 6, because your Bardic die is a die 6 at this particular point in time. But the way that I look at that is that as your character gains levels in the Bard class, they're getting a little bit more closely attuned to be able to commune with different kinds of spirits. So that's going to unlock different kinds of tales that you'll be able to use, say, when you unlock your D8 Bardic die, up to your D10 Bardic die, and then finally up to your D12 Bardic die. Now, once a tale has been selected, you will be able to retain that particular story in memory until your character completes a long or a short rest, at which time your character is going to forget that particular tale. However, your character can use this feature again to attempt to gain access to another tale. Obviously, not in the same turn. Doing so will make your character forget the previous tale as well and replace it with a new one. So there are a couple of ways that you're going to, quote unquote, lose the concept of what that particular spirit told you for its story. Once you've acquired a tale, however, your character will be able to make use of an action to bestow the benefits of that tale to either your own character or to a target you've chosen who is visible to your particular character and is within 30 feet of where your character is standing. Once the effects have been applied, they cannot be applied again unless you manage to roll the same tale again the next time your character is rolling on the spirit table. And essentially, what that means is that your character can very early on in the day or very shortly after a rest roll against the spirit table to commune with a particular spirit that they want to be able to tell the story about. They can hold on to that particular tale until they use it as an action, which at that particular point in time, they will apply the effects to either your own character, another party member, or a specific target, depending on the type of tale you had rolled. And once that effect is used, you've essentially forgotten what that tale is. So you can hold it into memory until you use it, and then you're done. Now, admittedly, this next part is going to be a little bit time consuming for me, because I'm going to literally go through all 12 of those particular tales over the course of the video. Initially, I'm only going to do items 1 through 6, simply because they're only appropriate at this particular level. But as we gain additional levels, I will go through and make sure that we deal with those additional ones that come into play once we unlock the specific die that will allow them to be usable. And the first one is called Tale of the Clever Animal, and it will grant an extra die roll equal in size to your character's current bardic dice to any intelligence, wisdom, or charisma check that particular target must roll. This has a duration of 10 minutes and affects any roll made in that 10-minute period, and it does not expire until the duration itself is finished, meaning that when the character rolls it, that expiration of that roll doesn't go away. It's still there for another use if they need it. It also does not require your character to maintain any level of concentration to keep that effect into place. There are a couple of ways that we can go through and try to link this into our character's action sheet. And the way that I think makes the most sense is to create a group called Tales from Beyond. And the reason why is I want to link all of these particular tales that we're going to gain here into this particular group. Now, this particular one is called Tale of the Clever Animal. So I'm going to change this. Now, I'm going to preload 4 effects onto this particular ability here. And that is because I want to take into account all of the instances where our bardic dice increase, and I want to do that here. I don't want to do that later in the video. So the first one I'm going to copy into place is Tale of the Clever Animal. It's going to be a check with a roll of a d6 on the intelligence, wisdom, or charisma stats. And it has a duration of 10 minutes. It can apply to any target you're going to put this on, and it doesn't expire through the use of this particular roll. And you can see what I'm going to do next essentially is going to be the same thing, except this time I'm using a d8 when it comes to its check. And it's also going to have a duration of 10 minutes, and it doesn't expire, and it can go on any target. So I'm going to go ahead and preload all of these effects, and then I'll be right back. So I now have all of these preloaded into our character's action sheet. Now when I'm in a combat and action situation, and I minimize that, we can see that we have the clever animal references here. And all you have to really do is be sure you choose the right D roll or die roll out of this particular group. Once you do that, and let's say that I'm going to apply this effect to Ape 1, all I do is just drop that particular effect there. And now anytime they make an intelligence, wisdom, or charisma based check, they will gain an extra d6 that comes into place. The Tale of the Renowned Duelist will apply only to a target your character is going to make a melee-based spell attack against. When it hits, it will do 2 die rolls of your Bardic Inspiration die in additional damage. In addition to that, you will also be able to add your character's Charisma modifier to it. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pop this open, and then I'm going to drop this back into place. And the reason why I've done that, and I'm going to leave that over there, is because doing so automatically adds a copy of this particular feature into this particular action sheet in the exact same group, so I don't have to worry about manipulating that around. I can now also keep the tail of the portion there and just simply rename the part that's going to be different. Now, once again, I'm going to go through and preload a copy of all of the types of damage that I can do. And there are actually 2 ways that we can go about setting this up. Well, the first is I'm going to get rid of that. And this is going to be my preferred way simply because it's going to provide, if you will, a history in relation to an effect that's going to drop into our chat. I'm going to get rid of the duration as that's no longer required. But this one's going to be different because it's only going to apply to your character and it will expire on the next roll. I'm then going to go ahead and preload all of the other ones, and I will bring you back once I'm ready. So everything is now preloaded. So what this means is essentially as follows. So this example is going to be slightly unrealistic because the spell that I found, actually the very first spell that I found, that actually has a melee-based spell attack roll is Mordenkainen's Sword. And that's a level 7 spell. So it's going to take a little while to be able to get to this one in order for you to be able to take advantage of it. But the way this works, and let's say that our character has access to this level 7 spell, is that I'm going to target the vampire. I'm then going to make, after I pop this open, make sure that this is set up right to charisma. There we go. Now we have our +6 there. I'm going to make my attack roll against that vampire. In this case, that's a miss. Let's say a couple of turns later on, I do it again. That's also going to be a miss. Later on, do it again. Finally, that's going to be a hit. Now I can go through and roll my damage. But before I do that, I want to ensure that I've applied the appropriate bardic dice roll bonus point of damage here, if you will, to my character. In this case, I'm going to use this particular effect. Now I'm going to go ahead and roll the damage. And when I do that, the effect is going to go away. It's going to get rolled as part of additional damage die to this total roll on top of the 3d10 that are rolled for this particular effect. And now that vampire has been hit. That's how that particular spell works. I'm thinking other sources might have other spells that do require melee-based spell attack rolls. So you'll want to keep an eye out for those, but right now I only have the Player's Handbook and Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft loaded, so most of my spells have disappeared from my selection list. The Tale of Beloved Friends will grant a target as well as another target the first target can see and is within 5 feet of a number of temporary hit points equal to your character's Bardic Inspiration die plus your character's Charisma modifier. The player or target who you've selected as the initial target to grant temporary hit die to will have to update your character as to who they themselves also want to share that with. So once you have that information, you'll be able to apply the temporary hit points. But let's go ahead and set this up in our character's action sheet. Once again, I'm going to drag this into here. And we're going to acquire another copy of this. So I'm going to just minimize that so that we have this. I'm going to change this to be Tale of the Beloved Friends. And when I do that, I'm actually going to remove all of these particular effects here because you can't do temporary hit points through an effect like this. So I'm going to just simply delete the actions. And then I'm going to go ahead and add in 4 healing effects. And modify the first one. It's going to be a target. It's going to be temporary hit points. The first one I'm going to drag my d6 die into. That's going to be 1d6 temporary, but we're missing the bonus. I want to make sure that I select here CHA so that we gain the +4 charisma bonus as well. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the d8. There we go. And this is also going to be temporary hit points. I'm going to do it again for the d10. And it's temporary hit points. And then finally, the last die for the d12. And there we go. So how this is going to work in a combat situation is really going to be more around how comfortable you are doing things, because there are a couple of ways to do things. The first is that you can see here that I have Ape 1 and the Hound of Ill Omen targeted. Ape 1 has designated that the Hound of Ill Omen is going to be the other party member, if you will, that's going to gain these temporary hit points. When I do that, I can simply click this button. It's going to roll that die and add in temporary hit points to both of those, and it's only going to roll once, and that's because that's how temporary hit points work. But there is another way to do this. If you're not comfortable doing it that way, what you could have done is dropped a roll onto the ape. It's going to increase, which means it's going to increment this by 1 because we literally got a 2 on this particular die roll. And then you can drag and drop that onto the Hound of Ill Omen and it will do the exact same thing. So that is another way that this will work. But the end result here is that Ape 1 had to designate that Hound of Ill Omen was going to be, quote unquote, its friend that was going to also gain those temporary hit points. The Tale of the Runaway grants a target the means to teleport up to 30 feet from where they are currently standing to an unoccupied space that they can see, and they can do this as a reaction. At the same time, they can select a number of creatures it can see that are all within 30 feet of where they were originally standing before they teleported, that is equal to your character's charisma modifier, allowing them to use their own reactions to also teleport in a similar fashion. The way this works is that the first target, when they decide that they're going to teleport, at that particular point in time designates who else is going to be able to do so up to the number equal to your character's charisma modifier, which in this case is +4. At that particular time, the first target can execute their teleport. The second selection of targets, if you will then initiate their teleports. And they will all use their own reactions to be able to do so. So that does mean that all of those characters will not be able to use a reaction at all for the remaining duration of this particular turn. Now, generally, This could open up all of those characters to attacks of opportunity because it's not a forced move that is going through and initiating that particular movement. It's going to entirely be up to the DM because technically a teleport is instantaneous. There's no real indication that you're going to actually go through and teleport. So to be honest, I'd be on the fence either way. It really depends on the situation in my mind. This isn't something that we have to add to our character's action sheet, however, because there's really nothing here that's being actioned other than the use of a reaction. Tale of the Avenger will grant a target the means to deal out damage to any creature that hits it with a melee-based attack. The amount of damage is equal to the Bardic Inspiration die, and it will do force damage as the actual type of damage dealt. This will remain around for about 1 minute, but there is no way for Fantasy Grounds to automatically damage an attacker when they actually hit somebody with a melee-based attack. So this is something that the player or creature, if you will, who has been designated as the target to be able to do this, is going to have to do this on their own. And because of that, we're simply going to create a reminder effect that's going to have a duration of 1 minute. So I'm going to drop this into place. I'm going to then deal with that. So this is going to be Tale of the Avenger. And I'm going to clear out all of these particular actions because we don't need them. There we go. And then I'm going to set up a duration, if you will, on this particular effect. So I got to go through and create a new effect. Modify that. I'm going to call it Tale of the Avenger. And it's going to last for 1 minute, and it's going to be on a target, and it doesn't expire. And the way this is going to work in a combat situation, I'm going to designate, let's say that this got rolled, and I'm going to designate that Ape 1 is going to be that target. You yourself could preload a damage roll here. So, for instance, we could go through and create a new damage effect that is a D6. Nothing else is dealt with there, and I believe it is just normal damage, or is it force damage? Force damage. So it is force damage. So the ape could actually designate, hey, can you do 6 points to Ape 4? All you do is you drop that onto Ape 4, and it would do the appropriate amount of damage. In this case, it's now dying because it's already, well, actually, I don't know if it was dead or not. I wasn't paying attention. So that's how that would work. And in fact, I think this will work a little bit better because it guarantees it's going to be the force type of damage. And if that's the case, you'll want to go through and preload all of the other damage effects on the character to be able to do the appropriate damage die, if you will. So D8 would be the next for force damage. This effect will be a D10. And finally, this effect will be a D12. And that way, you've got everything ready to go for when somebody does this. Now, this is going to be around for roughly 60 seconds or 10 turns. So if I minimize that, you'll see that it's 10 turns here. Once this effect goes away, you won't be able to do this anymore. And finally, at this particular level, the Tale of the Traveler grants the target temporary hit points equal to your character's bardic level plus a bardic inspiration die roll. And while they have these temporary hit points, they will also gain a +1 to their AC and a +10 to their movement speed. Unfortunately, Fantasy Grounds does not have a means to use a conditional check to see if a character has temporary hit points, and if so, be able to do something else because of it. So the armor class adjustment, as well as the ability for the movement speed, is going to be somewhat manual, although for the armor class, we can create an effect for that. So I'm going to go ahead, and in this case, because I already have temporary hit points from Tales of the Beyond set up, I'm going to pop this one open and drop it into place. I'm going to minimize this, because that's going to save a little bit of time when it comes to some of the setup here. And this is called Tale of the Traveler. I do need to make an adjustment to this. It's still a D6 die roll, but it's not your charisma modifier. Instead, it is equal to your bardic level. So I'm going to go down until I get to BRD, which is Bard. That way, I don't have to worry about finagling around with trying to modify this every time Bard levels up. There we go. So that takes care of the temporary hit points portion. In relation to the armor class, what we will want to do is add a new effect here. And that will simply be Tale of the Traveler, semicolon, AC colon 1. It's going to last for, well, actually, there is no duration there. It's going to last for as long as they have temporary hit points. So we can't really put a duration or an expiration on this because you don't know how long those temporary hit points are going to stick around. So how is this going to work within a combat-based scenario? Well, the first thing that will happen is that when this particular tale is rolled, you will want to apply the number of hit points to them, as well as the AC increase. So I'm going to quickly drop that onto this ape 1, and now they have 9 hit points. In addition to that, they have 10 feet of additional movement. Once these temporary hit points are reduced to 0, then the armorer class effect goes away, as does the movement speed. And that's how this works. So it's going to have to be a lot of manual work involved. At Bard level 5, there are a couple of things that you'll need to take into account. The first is that your Bardic Inspiration die now increases from a D6 to a D8. That means that we also have 2 new Spirit Tales that we can add to our character's action sheet to accommodate for that. The first is called the Tale of the Beguiler, which will allow your character to force a target to make a wisdom-based saving throw, and if they fail that saving throw, they will suffer force damage equal to 2 bardic dice rolls for a maximum of 16 points of damage. And additionally, if they've failed their saving throw, they will also become incapacitated until the end of their next turn. So to do this, I'm going to go ahead and open up Tale of the Traveler, Avenger, and drop that into place to duplicate that, because we already have force damage here and it's already set for the appropriate type. I am then going to change this to Tale of the Beguiler. I believe that's spelled right. Yes, it is. One thing I want to do is I want to add a cast to this thing, because we're going to be forcing a wisdom-based saving throw. And because of that, I'm also going to want to ensure that I make sure our base setup here uses charisma so that we ensure we get the right saving throw that we need. The save is going to be a wisdom-based saving throw, so we want to ensure that the type is going to be wisdom. Once we do that, it's automatically going to calculate what that saving throw is going to be based off of the group DC, which is triggered and set up by this. We do have to modify each of these damage entries here, because we need to ensure that we do 2 times the amount of damage. But unfortunately, you can't simply apply 2 here. And in fact, that is the wrong way to do it. What you want to do instead is add in an additional die, because you're not going to multiply the value of a die that you have rolled. What you are going to do is trigger 2 die roll in order to calculate up what the total amount of damage is going to be. And then finally, we need to make sure that there's an incapacitation effect here. So I'm going to change this from Tale of the Avenger to Tale of the Beguiler. Semicolon, and then I'm going to, because I have issues typing it out, copy in the word incapacitated. So there is a duration. It is going to be 1 round. The Tale of the Phantom will grant a target invisibility until the end of their next turn, or unless they attack another creature. If they do manage to hit while they were invisible, the target that they attacked will take necrotic damage equal to the Bardic Inspiration die, which at this level is going to be a D8. The attacked target will also be frightened of the attacker until the end of the attacked target's next turn. It should be noted that while the rules don't strictly state it, if a weapon was used at the time of the attack, that weapon's damage would also apply. So if you attacked with a longsword, you would also do the damage of the longsword as well as that of the necrotic damage. So what we will do is set this up as an effect. I'm going to potentially copy the Tale of the Beguiler here, because we already have some of the damage set up here. And I've already removed the 2d6 because it's no longer applicable for this, because you can't do 2d6 points of damage in relation to this. So I'm going to pop this open, drag this back into place, and then just minimize that so we have that. I'm then going to change this to Phantom. And we're going to want 2 effects here, as well as the points of damage here, but we're going to change this from this to something else. First, I'm going to change this to Frightened. And that is because this Frightened effect is going to come into play if the attack was successful. I'm going to delete these three. Whoops, that's not delete. This is. I'm also going to delete the attack because we're not going to be the ones doing the attack unless we ourselves are making the attack. And if that's the case, then we're using one of our weapons up here. So I want to add in one more effect here, which will be for the invisibility aspect of the feature. So I want to go tail of the Beguiler, semicolon, invisible. Is there a duration on that? Next turn. Okay, so that's going to be, one round. It's going to be on the target, so it can be on your own character or it can be on somebody else, and it doesn't expend. Now I want to go ahead and add in 3 new damage effects. And this is going to take into account the damage that is going to be done at the time the attack itself is complete. So, tail. Oh, this isn't the Beguiler, it's the Phantom. Duh. I should go change these. And that's the first one. Modify this one. Totally did not realize that I typed that in. There we go. Now back to this. And we want to do DMG colon 2d8 force. Or nope, sorry, necrotic. I'm going to copy that, and it's going to expire on the next roll. I'm going to take care of that, and it expires on the next roll. And take care of that. And yes, I know I still have to go back and change the damage type. Or the amount of damage, I should say. So this is 2d10. And there. So now we've got this set up. Now, I'm going to use my own character for this example, but really the way that this is going to work is it can be on any other character that you're going to drop this effect on. So let's say we rolled Tales of the Phantom. Well, I'm going to make my character invisible for the time being. Then I'm going to say I attack this vampire. So I'm going to go ahead and make my usual attack roll, and I'm going to use this rapier. Not sure why I rolled with advantage, but okay. Oh, that's because I'm invisible. Now, in this case, that is a hit, which means I'm going to become visible again. So I don't want to remove this invisibility just yet, but I will in a moment. Now, before I actually roll the damage, I want to drop this effect onto my character. And that is because we want to be able to add in the 2d8 necrotic damage as the total amount of damage. So I'm going to roll my damage. It's going to expire the damage effect here. It's going to roll 2 additional 2d8 and apply that damage to the overall result. Now, because I did damage, that vampire is now frightened of my character. So I'm going to drop this into place there, expand that out, and drag this particular aspect of it to my character. Now, if it was the ape that had done this attack and successfully did damage, then you would drag the target to the ape. So it's whoever does the damage and whoever was invisible at the time. And then I'm going to remove the invisibility effect here. Now, this vampire is frightened of my character. They cannot approach that character. If at all possible, they're going to try to get away. Now, the frightened effect also has a duration. So I've already set it up to be 1 turn because it's going to be frightened until the end of the next turn. At Bard level 6, your character will gain the Spirit Session feature, giving your character a means to learn a spell that is not otherwise part of the normal bardic repertoire, meaning it can come from any class as long as the spell is a divination or necromancy-based spell, and you can do this through the use of a ritual. The level the spell is based on is equal to the number of willing creatures you wish to use during the hour-long ritual. And the maximum number of creatures that you can have attend to that ritual is equal to your character's proficiency bonus. For example, at level 6, your character can use up to 3 willing creatures to take part of this particular ritual. And if you did use 3 creatures, at the end of that ritual, you will be able to learn potentially the Animate Dead spell, for example. And temporarily, you will be able to add that to your character's list of known spells. This spell will remain available to your character until they choose to take a long rest, and it will disappear at the start of that long rest. Otherwise, as long as you have a level 3 spell slot available to you, you will be able to cast that, meaning that at level 6, your character can cast this spell up to 3 times. Once the ritual itself has been performed, your character won't be able to use the ritual again until they complete a long rest. So, there are 2 things that I want to do in relation to setting this up. The first is I'm going to take care of getting the ritual configured. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this onto our character's action sheet, and I'm going to throw this into the College of Spirits group. I'm then going to set this up so that it has 1 daily use. Now that takes care of us actually going through and casting said ritual. Now let's say that I did go through and want to use the Animate Dead spell. So I'm going to get rid of this because it can come from any source. And as we can see, this is a level 3 spell that is a Cleric, Eldritch Knight, Wizard, Arcane, or Arcane Trickster spell. What that means is that this is something that I can choose because it is also a necromancy-based spell. And this may not necessarily be applicable to all spells, but what I want to do is showcase how this spell should be added to your character's action sheet. The first thing you will initially want to do is drop this into your actual list of existing spells. That's going to add it to whatever level is applicable for it. But I don't want it to remain there. I actually want to move this into a new group called Spirit Session. And here is why. Because once I convert this to a particular spell group, it will allow me to now link any spell I throw into here into my charisma stat, meaning that if there's damage that this particular spell could theoretically do, then it will automatically make use of my charisma spellcasting capability as opposed to what the spell was originally configured to be able to go through and use. That would be this one, not that. Once I have that group there, then if I go through and say choose to select another spell of equal level, that I can just drop it into here and get rid of this spell. The other thing that I'll want to do is make sure that this spell is prepared. And that is because it is not a bardic spell by nature, so it's entirely possible it won't necessarily show up as an actionable spell, if you will, without you actually going through and doing that preparation here. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. At Bard level 10, there are a couple of things you'll want to make note of. First off is that your character is now able to use a D10 for their bardic inspiration die. That means that all of the effects that we have gone through and already configured, you will now be able to use the 1d10 version of that particular effect. So in this case, Tale of the Beguiler, you'd be able to use this 2d10 force damage one, whereas Tale of the Beloved Friends, you would be able to use this 1d10 plus 4 one. In addition to that, we also gain access to 2 brand new tales. That is number 9 and number 10. Tale of the Brute will allow a target you grant to be able to select any creature that is within 30 feet of that individual that you granted this capability to, and that they can see, and make those targets roll a wisdom-based saving throw. I should point out that there is no limit to the number of creatures this will apply to, as long as they are all within range and visible to that attacker. So if there are 20 creatures in that range, they could potentially choose all 20 of those targets. Any target who fails their saving throw in that group of targets will end up receiving a total of 3 bardic dice rolls of damage, specifically thunder damage, as well as will get knocked prone. Additionally, if any target manages to save on their saving throw, they will only suffer half damage and will not be knocked prone. So at this particular point, I'm going to make a copy of Tale of the Beguiler. And that is because it is the one that is most closely aligned with what we're looking at doing. I'm going to drop this into place, and then I'm going to rename this to Tale of the Brute. I'm going to modify this to also be Tale of the Brute. And I'm going to change incapacitated to prone. Now the duration of the prone state doesn't stay, so they're just simply knocked prone. That means they have to stand up on their own, so we can get rid of the duration. It's going to be on target, and it's going to not expire. I'm going to remove this 2d8 force damage one because we won't need that here. And we will want these two, but this isn't going to be force damage in this particular case, and we also need to increase the type of damage. It's going to be thunder damage. I'm going to change that first. And then I'm going to drag in an additional die into that total amount of damage that they're going to be dealt. And there we go. So now everything there's set up. This is still required because we are going to make them do a strength-based saving throw in this particular case. So let's go ahead and make that adjustment so that this is now a strength-based. Check. Everything else remains the same. Now, once again, I'm going to use my own character as the example for this. So I'm going to designate that the tail of the brute is assigned to my character. What that means is that I can now target, let's say, all of these hostile creatures. And I'm just going to expand this out so I can get access to that dragon. So I've got the vampire targeted already. Now, these guys are already dead, so that's not going to worry too much about them. And then I'm going to target these guys. So let's say that every single one of these creatures is within 30 feet of my character. They're going to do a saving throw. Some of them automatically failed because they're dead. Some failed, and some succeeded. Now what I do is I roll the damage. So at this level, it's 3d10 thunder damage. And anyone who is still targeted is now knocked prone. So I have to make sure that I apply the prone effect to them. Everyone else that managed to succeed on making their saving throw, which it actually doesn't look like anyone managed to succeed, they then are no longer targeted. So did everyone fail their saving throw? Yeah, they all failed their saving throw. That's a first, but nice to see. So that means that every single one of these creatures is now knocked prone. They have to spend some of their movement getting back up. So the way this is going to work, if let's say you designate that Ape 1 is actually going to be the one doing all of this, is going to be as follows. Ape 1 says that they're going to target all the creatures that are hostile because they're all within 30 feet of Ape 1. You'll notice, though, that I'm having our bard execute the targeting. And that is because the bard is the one that's actually going to be executing this particular set of rolls. So the ape has now designated it and executes the attack. Well, that's going to trigger the saving throw. Some managed to succeed. Some did not. I have made an adjustment to this effect because we should have had damage on success on there. And now we can see that all of the targets are still selected. However, as soon as I roll the damage, those that manage to succeed will be deselected from our target list. What that means is that the only group of targets that we have selected are the ones that actually properly failed their saving throw. So they get the prone effect. The tail of the dragon allows you to grant a target the means to breathe fire in a 30-foot cone from their mouth, forcing any target in that area to make a dexterity-based saving throw or suffer 4 rolls of your bardic dice damage in fire damage. If, however, a target manages to make their saving throw, they will only suffer half of that damage. So this is actually a situation that is going to be very similar to Tail of the Brute. So I'm going to make a copy of this particular feature and drag it into place. And now you can see why I've added this as a group, because if you're not going to use this, you just minimize this and you don't see anything. It gets quite full. So this is Tail of the Dragon. We do not need the prone effect, so I'm going to delete that. This is going to change from thunder to fire damage. In addition to that, we need to add in a 4th dice for the actual roll. And once again, I'm preloading the damage for when we acquire the ability to roll a d12. And in this case, this is going to be a dexterity-based saving throw. During a combat scenario, let's say, for example, that Ape 1 is once again the individual that has been designated the ability to breathe fire. And let's say that all of our targets, once again, are within that designated range. So it looks like Ape 4, Ape 3, Ape 2. I have all of the targets again. The way this works is that, again, you yourself are going to have to be the one doing the rolls. So you'll make the attack roll because you have all of the effects in place. Anything that manages to succeed will suffer half damage. Anything that fails their saving throw will take the full brunt of the damage. Now you just simply roll the damage. And then anything that managed to succeed will be deselected from your target list. Anything that failed will have suffered their full amount of damage. At Bard level 14, your character will gain the Mystical Connection feature, which allows you to make 2 rolls against the Spirit's table as opposed to just 1. And because of that, you get to choose which effect you want to apply. For example, let's say that you roll 2d10s and end up rolling a 3 and a 9. This means you could choose the effects of Tale of the Beloved Friends or the effects from Tales of the Brute stories. If, however, you happen to roll the same value, let's say 2 3s, then you can ignore the roll entirely and choose any effect on the table. Ironically, this does mean that you could potentially choose the Tale of the Angel or Tale of the Mindbender stories before you unlock the means to actually roll d12 bardic dice. This is literally the only opportunity that you can do something like this, and rolling 2 numbers the same is rare, but not impossible when it comes to rolling a die of a d10 size, for example, or even a d12 for that matter. But in any event, you're literally only 1 level away from level 15, so at level 15, you gain the ability to use a d12. So the way I see this working is that it's potentially a way of providing a means of your own character being able to see their own potential. And thus, they're just barely able to take advantage of it while learning to improve their use of their bardic inspiration as well as their connection to the spirits. The rest of this information sheet is there to encourage you to think of the kinds of tales you want to tell when making use of these kinds of spirit tales, as it really is there to enhance the role-playing aspect of this subclass, so I highly recommend considering it as you will get more comfortable in relation to your actual party group there. Unfortunately, what I don't like is the fact that this is being listed in the level 14 portion of this particular feature here, rather than being directly linked to Tales of the Beyond and kind of encouraging you to do that from the start. So I know I actually haven't shown how you would roll against the Spirit Tales table just yet. That's because I wanted to save it for this one, because it's going to be the exact same thing. Right now, your character has the ability to roll a d10 die when it comes to your bardic dice. When it comes to the new feature that you've just gained, Mystical Connection, you can do that twice. So the way that works is you pick up 2d10, roll that in the chat box, and then you get 2 numbers. So in this case, I have a 3 and a 9. So that it's ironic that I would roll a 3 and a 9 because that's exactly what I chose as my example. So essentially, I get to choose the Beloved Friends or Tale of the Brute. Now, if at some point I had rolled 2 numbers the same, and again, that isn't going to do it, so let's see if I can get one. No, I'm not going to be able to do it. I was close, but not quite. Then you would actually get to cherry pick whichever option here you want to use. That's the effect you will then apply. So at Bard level 15, you get to make the last adjustment that you need to make to your character. At this point, your character has now unlocked the ability to use the D12 bardic dice rolls. However, we do still have 2 more table elements that we need to add to our character, specifically Tale of the Angel and Tale of the Mindbender. Tale of the Angel will allow your character to heal a target a total number of hit points equal to 2d12 hit points of actual healing. And this is primarily because your character has unlocked access to the 2d12 bardic dice. In addition to that, you'll add your character's charisma modifier. Additionally, your character will be able to cancel out one condition, which is made up of the options listed in the information sheet of the table, and they are poisoned, paralyzed, petrified, deafened, or blinded effects. So I'm going to take Tales of the Beloved here, as it's the one that is closest to this, and go ahead and modify this particular set of effects. I'm going to get rid of all of the effects except for the last one. We already have the +4 here for the charisma modifier, so we don't need to modify that. We do need to change this back to hit points, and we need to add in an additional dice. And that's it. That's all we have to do. When it comes to canceling out the effects, the Dungeon Master is going to have to do that. You won't necessarily be able to see all of the effects associated with a particular character. So, for example, here. But if you do, you'll be able to let the DM know which one to remove. If you weren't the one to apply it, you won't be the one to be able to remove it. When it comes to the healing, however, all you really have to do is just drag and drop the healing component directly onto the target in question that you want to heal. And if that particular target also has an effect, you get to choose to remove it at that particular time as long as it matches one of the effects listed. Tale of the Mindbender, which is the last thing that we have to add, allows our character to force a target to make an intelligence-based saving throw or suffer 3d12 points of psychic damage, as well as the potential to get stunned. The duration of that stun will last until the end of its next turn. So the target that suffered the 3d12 points of damage and became stunned is the one who would have to wait till the end of their turn in order to be able to remove the stun effect. If that target succeeds on their saving throw, they will not take any damage, nor will they suffer a stunning effect. So, I'm going to go ahead and copy Tales of the Dragon here, because that's going to be the closest. I'm going to pop that open, drop it into place, and then simply modify this. So it's going to be, Tale of the Mindbender. We can get rid of this 40-10 points of fire damage, and we will want to update this to be psychic damage. We also want to clear out the number of dice that are here by 1. And you can right-click on that, and you can erase the dice, so you can go clear dice. We then want to pick up and right-click 2 additional times to get a total of 3d12 of dice here and drop that into place. I do not believe there is any additional... No, there's no additional damage that is done here. We do also want to modify the saving throw because it's an intelligence-based saving throw, not a strength-based saving throw or dexterity. Oops, I went right by it. So, intelligence. There we go. Now, we can also get rid of the half part because it's either going to be an either or in this particular case. Now, in this particular case, this tale can only come from your character, and it can only be done on one particular target at a time. So you can't have multiple targets selected. You will only be able to do this against a single target. So I'm going to go ahead and choose the Mind Flayer here, because it would be ironic if this worked, and have them make a saving throw. In this case, they managed to succeed, which means they suffer no damage at all. But let's say the next turn comes around and I execute a tale and I get the same one again. Again, this time they succeeded. Wow. They would have to roll really, really poorly in order to fail here. There we go. Now we got a failure. What this means is that I can now apply the damage to the Mind Flayer. And they will suffer that damage based, wow, I rolled a 24, based on the total amount that they received. So at this particular point in time, they are stunned. So I do have to add in a stunned effect here. But let me go ahead and do that now. I want this to be Tale of the Mindbender. And I believe it is stunned, not stunned, for the actual effect. Now I can go ahead and drop stunned onto that particular character, and they will be stunned, and get rid of that, for the remaining duration of this round until the end of their next turn. I really love the concept of the subclass, and I can see why it made sense to have it originated from Ravenloft's world as opposed to any of the other genres that are out there. However, this could potentially be a complicated class to play, as there's the need to be quite inventive with the storytelling aspect of it to really integrate the role-playing into the subclass appropriately. Now, that isn't to say that a new player couldn't use this as a learning experience to be able to go through and do that, but it's definitely going to require a lot more effort in order to be able to do that, as opposed to someone who has experience executing a role-playing scenario. However, this does bring us to the end of this video. I hope you found it useful and informative, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. I wish to thank you for taking the time to watch this particular video. I hope you found it informative and useful to familiarizing yourself with Fantasy Grounds in general, and that you had fun in the process. If you found the video useful and you liked the content of the particular video, go ahead and click that like button to let me know. And if you have any questions specific to the topic covered by this particular video, or just have some comments in general, please feel free to post something in the comment section, and I will do my best to respond to any questions that are asked. Additionally, I do release content quite regularly, and it's generally specific to Fantasy Grounds or 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons at this time. So if you'd like to be notified when new videos come out, go ahead and subscribe and click the notification bell to ensure that notification is sent to you when I release a new video.